Hello everyone, Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about poetry. In this video, we are going to look at the Emigree, 1993, by Carol Rumens. This is a poem about migration caused by war and conflict. The exact details are not given, but the poem was written shortly after the Gulf War of 1990-91, so it may have been based on the consequences of that. The poet lived in Northern Ireland for a while, so the history of that country may also have influenced her. And there we have the poet. So she was born in 1944, London, England, and she is still going strong. She went to London University but left before completing her degree. She gained a postgraduate diploma with distinction in writing for the stage from Manchester City College in 2001. She began publishing music reviews at the age of 16 and has held many creative writing posts. She has lived in Northern Ireland and she has also written novels and plays. So as you can see, quite an interesting background, very different to most of the poets in the anthology, and a very inspiring example for us all to learn from. And this difference in her background can be seen in the poem as well, as we'll see. Okay, so as you can see there, the glossary is not that big, so she doesn't use difficult words as such, but just a word of warning, the poem is quite tricky, it's quite ambiguous and confusing. But anyway, in the meantime, if you can just learn these words or read through them 2 or 3 times, and then she uses these techniques. But notice she does also just use simple word classes, but very powerfully and effectively. This one is an advanced technique, so don't worry too much about this for now. We're going to talk about it more later on. Okay, so let's listen to an audio version and then we'll go through it.
There once was a country. I left it as a child, but my memory of it is sunlight clear. For it seems I never saw it in that November which I am told comes to the mildest city. The worst news I receive of it cannot break my original view. The bright, filled paperweight. It may be at war, it may be sick with tyrants, but I'm branded by an impression of sunlight. The wide streets of that city, the graceful slopes glow even clearer as time rolls its tanks, and the frontiers rise between us close like waves. That child's vocabulary I carried here, like a hollow doll, opens and spills a grammar. Soon I shall have every colored molecule of it. It may by now be a lie, banned by the state, but I can't get it off my tongue. It tastes of sunlight. I have no passport. There's no way back at all, but my city comes to me in its own white plane. It lies down in front of me, docile as paper. I comb its hair and love its shining eyes. My city takes me dancing through the city of walls. They accuse me of absence. They circle me. They accuse me of being dark in their free city. My city hides behind me. They mutter death, and my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight.
Okay. So notice how it starts almost like a fairy tale. This is almost like once upon a time, which makes sense because she left it as a child, right? But even though she left it as a child, she seems to have very strong memories of it. So she says here, sunlight clear. And this is actually kind of a simile, a hidden simile, even though it doesn't use like or as. Basically, she's saying that her memories are as clear as sunlight. So obviously, sunlight is the clearest thing there is. But part of the reason for that is that she must have left when it was sunny during the summer, basically, because if she had waited until it was November, until winter was starting, and in fact, people tell her that in that city, like all cities which are nice and sunny, but they all have winters as well. But because she never saw a winter or doesn't remember a winter, to her it's always sunny. But also, it's sunny and clear because these are childhood memories which tend to be more positive than kind of later memories. And then she says, but no matter what kind of bad news she gets, it doesn't change her view, it doesn't change her memories. Okay. And then this line here is quite confusing, and it's the first of many confusing lines, really. But I mean, this is a paperweight, for example. So it could be a reference to those paperweights you get, which are of cities, and you shake them, and sometimes there's snow. Obviously, in this case, it's not going to be snow because she always sees it, remembers it as sunny. But then she says, "Oh, it could be at war right now." And here she uses personification. Maybe a dictator has taken over and ended democracy and freedom and so on. But for her, all she remembers is this impression of sunlight. Although the word branded here is interesting because branded means to mark, to stamp. And sometimes animals are stamped by burning, basically, branded. So there are connotations here of pain. In this case, it could be that the pain of maybe leaving. Okay. So the word branded here is both positive and negative. Positive in the sense that her memories are very strong and of sunlight, but there are these connotations of pain, which could be to do with the pain of leaving, or could be to do with the pain of the fact that she now knows that now the city is not a happy place. And then similarly here, the white streets. I mean, streets are not normally white. So this could be maybe the houses are painted white. In hot countries, quite often houses are painted white. Or this could again just be an extension of her positive memories. But like sunlight is white essentially. I mean, I know we tend to think of the sun as yellow, but the light itself is white. And then when she describes the city, the slope, so it would seem to be a city with hills. So remember, these are just random pictures from the internet, but maybe the city that she actually left had hills. And notice the positive adjectives she uses. So graceful means beautiful and elegant. And she's saying that the whiteness and the glow of those streets just become clearer and clearer even as time goes on. But then this phrase here, this metaphor is very confusing. Time rolls its tanks. We don't really know what it means. I mean, that time here could be referring to what she's saying here about the fact that her memories only grow stronger, even as the tanks come rolling into the streets of the city that she's left. Okay. And then this next line also is very, very confusing. I mean, there's a simile here which could just be to do with the fact that, so she's talking about the frontiers, which means borders. So this could be implying that either the country was invaded by another country or there's a civil war going on, so that frontiers, borders are arising within the country, and maybe more than just one or two. So maybe that's what this close like waves means. So remember, guys, with this poem, it's a good opportunity to remember it's not about understanding a poem as such. There's no mathematical answer. It's about the ability to, yes, understand it in basic terms and then be able to discuss it in writing, the various interpretations. The worst thing you can do is just panic and not write anything. And then she left as a child, and therefore she had only started learning the language. Okay, so she's only got a child's vocabulary, just a small vocabulary. And this hollow doll again is ambiguous. We don't know what that means, but she seems to be referring to herself, a simile, as a hollow doll. But the hollow is probably more to do with her mind. Okay, so that our mind, our brains are hollow. We philosophers tell us. I mean, to a certain extent, we know this anyway. Our minds are blank, and they get filled by knowledge and facts and language in particular, and grammar. And then the next line again is very, very confusing. Certainly, molecules themselves don't have a color as such, but we can maybe just skip that line for now. But this line is fairly straightforward. She's saying that when she refers to the language as being alive, what she means is that it's that the people who have taken over are against that language. They are banning it. They may be suggesting that these people who are speaking that language are using it to spread lies against them. Okay, so that sounds like more like a civil war actually. But no matter what happens, she can't get rid of the language that she's learned as a child. Okay, childhood memories are the strongest of memories. You can't really get rid of them, no matter how much you try. And then this line is advanced technique called synesthesia. I'm going to talk about that later, but just in case you're wondering, that obviously sunlight, you can feel it on your skin, but you can't taste it. And although taste and touch are sort of similar, they're not quite the same. So this is mixing of the senses, and this is called synesthesia. And then here, this line is fairly straightforward. She doesn't have a passport. She can't go back. And then the next line again is confusing. But when she says this, maybe what she means is she's thinking about maybe this is her memories of when she came on this plane, and most airplanes are white. I mean, sometimes they're painted with different colors. Or she might be thinking about the paper airplanes that children play with, and maybe she's playing with, which would tie in with this use of the word paper here in the next line. And but the main point being that she is now personifying the city. Okay, the city lies down in front of her, docile as paper. So there's a simile. This means gentle and easygoing. And now she's personifying the city as a doll. Okay, she combs its hair and she loves its shining eyes. So she's playing in her mind with her city the way that children play with dolls. But now again here, lots of confusion and ambiguity here. My city takes me dancing through the city. So this repetition of city, very, very strange. And actually, with this final stanza, what's happening here, she's confusing the city that she's come from and the city that she's moved to. And this makes sense because her childhood memories are mixed in with her adult memories. And actually, childhood memories, quite often, we don't know whether they're real or not. Sometimes dreams and later experiences get confused with your early memories, and you can't really tell the difference between them. And the city of walls, now this would suggest that this is the city that she came from. Some cities have lots of walls in them, okay? And then here, her use of pronouns also become confusing because here, this line, this they, would seem to be referring to the city that she left, and the people there are accusing her of leaving, maybe of being not a traitor exactly, but kind of giving up and leaving instead of maybe staying and fighting the invaders or the tyrant. But then this they seems to be referring to people where she's moved because here she seems to be experiencing racism. Yeah, so here she's in the new free city. And then here, my city hides behind me. So again, this is really confusing. So on the one hand, again, personification, but maybe she's referring to the fact that, so this is possibly the city that she comes from, but because she identifies herself so much with her city, and the hiding is obviously connotations of fear, so maybe her original identity, her original city is hiding from the racism, okay? And then they mutter death. I mean, this is, again, extremely ambiguous. This is probably referring to her original city because in her new city, it's unlikely that they would threaten her with death. I mean, some people might, but most people, there might be more people who are actually racist, but they wouldn't go as far as to threaten death. And then this last line, on the one hand, is fairly straightforward that you can't have a shadow without sunlight. But again, it's not clear whether she's referring to her original city or the new city, whether this is just in her mind. Again, her happy sunlit memories from when she left, or whether she's talking about the city where she is right now. So, a very difficult, ambiguous poem, and that's good and bad news. So, the bad news is that it's difficult, but the good news is that actually that gives you many opportunities to talk about the different interpretations, and that will actually get you more marks. But please, for a grade 4 or 5, all you have to do is to write something down. Okay, do not panic and end up writing nothing at all. So as long as you've understood basically what the poem is about, make sure you are able to answer the question they asked you to some extent. Okay, so AO1, to be able to read, understand, and respond to the poem using quotes and references. So here are the various quotes. You only need between 4 and 6 quotes. Here are the techniques that she uses. Please pause the video and make sure you understand these techniques. I'm going to move on. AO2, language, form, and structure, using techniques and terminology. So language means words and phrases and their effects. So thoughts, feelings, images in your mind and heart, and connotations, the different possible meanings of a word. So for example, we talked about the word branded, the different possibilities there. And these are just some 3 random quotes from the previous slide. I'm not saying you have to use these ones. And then in terms of form and structure, the poem is not of a specific form, nor does it have a rhyme or rhythm scheme. At first glance, the stanzas seem to be of the same length, but this turns out not to be the case, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on. In terms of techniques and terminology, Rumens uses many techniques, including similes, metaphors, and personification, but also just very effective word classes, or words such as adjectives here. And then in terms of context, it's going to be difficult because, in a way, there isn't much context, and that's the challenge, really. But for grade 4 or 5, which is what we're thinking about initially, you can just make some of these points here. So, as far as we know, Rumens has not been personally affected by migration or conflict. So, this is clearly just something that she feels strongly about. As a poet, she's a very sympathetic and empathetic person. So, she probably feels for people who have to migrate. And it was written shortly, but it was written shortly after the Gulf War of 1990-91. So the poem may have been affected by that. And forced migration is something that has always happened and is happening right now, which also explains why Rumens may have felt compelled to write about it. Okay, so you have now learned more than enough to get a grade 4 or 5, depending on how you write your essay. There is a quiz to test your understanding so far. So please pause the video here and have a good go at these questions. I'm going to move to the answer slide in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. So here are the answers. Please pause the video and make sure that you got at least 50%, but you're really aiming for 70, 90, 100%. And if you really struggled, you need to go back and listen again. And once you have mastered these questions, all you have to do is to add a bit more detail and convert them into flowing sentences and paragraphs. So you might get a question like this. How does the poet present the theme of migration in the Emigree compare with one other poem in the anthology? You could compare with Checking Out My History or Tissue. So when you go into the exam, you should have a main poem in mind that you're going to compare with, depending on which poem turns up. But then depending on the question, you should have 1 or 2 backup poems. So obviously so if the question is, for example, about identity, so in this case, obviously the narrator is affected in terms of her identity, you could compare with Checking Out My History or Tissue. Or you could compare with Kamikaze, where the pilot, by rejecting his mission, he effectively rejected his identity as a Japanese kamikaze and rejected his tradition and culture. And you might start something like this. The poet presents the theme of migration by describing the narrator's traumatic experiences of leaving her country of birth. So this means something that affects you really badly. She uses techniques such as metaphors to do this. The poem begins almost like a story. There once was a country, which is a bit like Once Upon a Time. This makes sense because the narrator's memories are vague, they are from childhood, and therefore almost like a children's fairy tale. So, about 4 paragraphs like that, plus an introduction and conclusion, and just a little bit of context or lack of context. You can just say that actually would be more than enough to get you a grade 4 or 5. But if you're aiming higher, let's carry on. So, so in terms of tone and mood, obviously a very sad, nostalgic tone. Nostalgic means when you look back with happiness to your memories. And the mood created is also sad and sympathetic. We feel sorry for her as a child. We feel sorry for her as a woman. There's no rhyme or rhythm, which obviously reflects the chaos of war and conflict and having to leave your country for no reason. In terms of language, I mean, there's so much. So although the individual words are not very difficult, the the way she uses them is very, very tricky. But your challenge here is not to panic, not to worry too much about the exact meanings of the phrases, but to just write down the different possibilities, okay? So you could talk about the different interpretations of the word branded. You could talk about the mixing of the senses here, the use of synesthesia in this line, in this sentence here. You could talk about this metaphor and what the different possibilities might be of what that means. And then for this stanza, you could talk about how she mixes the two cities. We're not sure which one she's referring to, but that's deliberate, okay? It's not accidental. It's not that she forgot to do this. It's deliberate, the mixing of the cities, the ambiguity of the pronouns. This this is happening in her mind. She's mixing her two cities and her memories as a child, as an adult. And then in terms of form, structure, and context, so we talked about form or lack of form, and we talked about the structure in terms of how it starts off very clearly about her original city, but then ends by mixing the two cities and the context or the lack of context you could talk about. Okay. Okay, so here's the advanced quiz. Please pause the video here and have a good go at these questions. I'm going to move forward to the answer slide in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. So please pause the video here and check your answers. So in this poem in particular, it's not about having the right answers. So as long as you're on the right track, or here, make sure that you learn some of these things that I mentioned earlier. And actually, I've added some information here which I didn't talk about. So I'll just read through this, and by all means, just learn that now. So Carol Rumen seems to have no personal no experience of migration. So this poem may simply reflect the fact that this is a topic that many people feel very strongly about. The period that she spent in Ireland may also have affected her poetry because of the conflict in that country. And with everything up here to this point I've mentioned, and then this I sort of hinted at, she herself has said that it is more about internal migration or conflict and has tied this to her interest in Russian writers. So you may want to do your own little research there. Okay, so you have now learned more than enough for a grade 6 or 7. Such a paragraph might look like this. So up to here is the same as before, and I've added this. We know that this cannot be from her personal experience because she was born in London, but she may have been influenced by her time in Northern Ireland. The poem was written shortly after the Gulf War of 1990-91, and the consequences of that may also have inspired the poem. Furthermore, forced migration is something that has always happened and is happening now, which also explains why Rumens may have felt compelled to write about it. And then in terms of the very highest grades, you might talk about these quotes here. Okay, so remember, it's not about giving the right or wrong answer. It's not mathematics. It's about your ability to write down or to discuss in writing the various options. If you've got your own ideas or just writing down some of the ideas I've suggested. And then the lack of form and the unexpected difference in stanza lengths. You can also talk about the title. So the Emigree is clearly, she has made it clear that firstly it's a woman speaking, so maybe the effect, I mean, most migrants tend to be male, but here she's talking about the effect on a female, but also by choosing the French version of the word, obviously kind of hinting at the fact that migration happens to other people from other countries. And then if you could just discuss why a poet might write about something that does not seem to have affected them directly. You could also talk about her own explanation that is more about internal conflict and her interest in Russian writers. And actually, that's interesting because Russian writers were often forced into internal exile. They were sent off to Siberia, which is like a very uh, cold, freezing part of Russia. Okay. So that ties in with the whole idea of internal migration, both in terms of internal in the sense of being in the mind, but internal being in the sense of within a country. And actually, it's even possible that in this poem she has had to migrate to a different city but within the same country. So in Ukraine, that's happened, and obviously that's not as bad as having to move to a different country, but it's just as bad. Usually happens because you've lost your home and people have been killed. So it can be almost as bad as having to migrate to a different country. Okay, so very, very tricky poem, but there's an opportunity there to increase your marks if you can discuss the alternative interpretations, which actually get you more marks. So once you've done that, you can complete the essay we've started. How does the poet present the theme of migration in the Emigree? And please remember the worst thing you can do is panic and not write anything. Just write something, your thoughts, feelings, images, the different possibilities. If you're confused, you can just say this poem is confusing. It could mean this or it could mean that. Okay, so I hope you found that video useful on this very, very confusing and difficult and ambiguous poem. And if you found it useful, please do subscribe and tell all your friends about it. And I will see you in the next video for the next poem.